Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for tuning in. My name is Robin Wouters. I'm a technology journalist specialized in the European innovation ecosystems, and as you may be aware, also the founder of Tech.eu. I'm delighted to be joined here today for the Tech.eu podcast by the co-founder and CEO of what I think is a super interesting deep tech company born in the CEE region, in Bulgaria more specifically. Please welcome Svilen Rangelov. He is co-founder and CEO of a company called Dronamics. And they're built as the world's first cargo drone airline. Big warm welcome, Svilen. How are you?
Thank you, Robin. It's a pleasure to be here.
Pleasure to have you. Can you tell us a little bit more about Dronamics and what you guys are building over there?
Sure. So, around 10 years ago, Jeff Bezos went on 60 Minutes and showcased how the future will be all about deliveries by drone. Obviously, they were looking at using very, very small drones to deliver your package to your house. My brother and I, who's an aerospace engineer, my background is in economics. uh, he and I were chatting, and we were like, "This would never work in Bulgaria. This would never work in, a crowded urban setting. It would be great for suburban America, or like, I don't know, 5% of the world's population, but not for the other 95%." So we started thinking about like, okay, what would drones be good for? And the more and more we thought about it, we realized actually the true challenge is connecting cities and communities that want to trade with each other, but happen to be so remote that they always have to trade with like a big center of commerce. So enabling people to shop and make trade between tier two, tier three cities. Uh, that's what really inspired us to begin Dronamics.
So you have this idea with your brother. You sort of research the market, I guess, what is already out there, what's possible. But then what's the next step? How do you even get started on like building your own airplane essentially?
Yeah, so we we saw, okay, Amazon has all the money in the world. They'll definitely crack eventually the small drone delivery market. It's going to be them or China, ultimately mass producing small plastic electronics. It's going to end up a duopoly of sorts. Then on the other end of the spectrum, we saw, again, a duopoly, Airbus and Boeing, super complex airframes, 4 million parts in an airplane. Then in the middle is where we thought we would add the most value. You need something the size of a small delivery van, because right now you have very big airplanes getting offloaded onto very big trucks, but those very big trucks are not who rings your doorbell. You need an additional step handover to a smaller last mile van, and that's what we wanted to do. So we did all that research. We uncovered that this could be quite valuable, and then checked it with some of my brother's professors at the Technical University in Delft, where he had studied, and then applied to an accelerator in Bulgaria called 11, got in, and then started working on the company September 2014. Funny story is we promised not to shave until the first full-scale airplane flies, and it took us 8.5 years. And a month ago, a month or two ago, we finally were able to shave because we flew the Black Swan aircraft for the first time.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was going to mention. The name is Black Swan. Very cool that you had your first commercial flight after less than 10 years, essentially, after the company was founded. And we'll talk more about that in a second, but I want to sort of go back to the early days. And I realized that from the both of you, your brother is the actual aerospace engineer. But I'm wondering how, in a nutshell, how difficult was it to sort of go from essentially nothing to the first working prototype? Like, what are some of the unexpected challenges that he had to overcome in building this?
Well, we were both a little bit insiders and a little bit outsiders, and definitely the outsider part helped because we always thought we'll be ready sooner than we ended up being. But there's a question to be had. Sometimes people say, if you knew how difficult the task would end up being, would you even start it? I think we would have still done it. But there were a number of challenges, mostly because starting from Bulgaria, a country that hasn't built airplanes for 70 years, there was no existing supply chain. There was no talent to poach from, and so on. So we had to bring a lot of people back. We had to upskill a lot of people who had just graduated the local university. We had to essentially wheel it into existence, the whole thing, and that was an order of magnitude harder problem to solve, especially with a fraction of the funding that some of those companies in the US or Western Europe were able to get.
Yeah. Was it an option to start the company elsewhere rather than Bulgaria then?
It was, both me and my brother had studied and lived abroad. But at the time, 2014, we thought we needed quite a bit of help and support. So an accelerator program would have been best. At that time, YC was still 25K initial check. This was the check size of 11 in Bulgaria, and also check size of my brother's university, who also had an accelerator then. And we just thought, okay, yeah, YC definitely would help tremendously. But we would definitely stretch the dollar a lot longer in Bulgaria, which happens to be, flat 10% taxes, lowest cost country in the EU. So it just made a lot of sense to base ourselves there.
Yep, yeah, that makes sense. So let's talk about the first flight. Obviously, that's a really big milestone for you guys. But can you tell us a little bit about the road leading up to that first flight? Like, what are some of the, and maybe on the business side even, what are some of the things that you need to sort of jump across before you can even start thinking about the first flight?
Yeah. No, so we've been. This was the first flight of our first full-scale airplane. We've done tests and flights of the small-scale units that we've built throughout the years. So even to get here, we had to do quite a bit of work. The flight test campaign began at the end of last year, and so the first flight was essentially a very important midpoint because we had to do a whole lot of ground tests to get there, taxi tests at different speeds, solve quite a few issues, essentially a whack-a-mole game.
Right.
And it was quite an achievement to get the airplane in the air. Also because it looks very traditional, but it's actually not. It's very innovative. We have very high lift capabilities because of the wings and some other elements that we're using. So to the untrained eye, it looks a very conventional airplane, but it's actually a much higher performance one. And that also adds a lot of uncertainty that we were able to finally clear and validate with this first flight. Now, we'll continue with the test flights. The program should run towards, until the end of this year, at which point we'll be able to start commercial service. So our plan is to start commercial flights at the end of this year or beginning of next. And we'll start in Greece, flying between some of the islands there and some of the less trafficked routes.
Yeah. And what needs to happen for you to have those commercial flights? Do you need to make deals with the airline specifically? Is it also the airports that need to get involved? Like, how does it work?
So we already have the license. So we're licensed under the new EU drone rules. We remain the only company to have such a license with such a big drone. And so the license is valid throughout all of the EU on particular low risk routes. So then we go to the particular country, Greece, and we talk to the airport authorities. We determine the risk level of each individual route, and then we're able to start those flights. On the commercial side, yes, we have a number of agreements with customers, including like forwarders or even shippers directly. So it's a very familiar to the air cargo world, where you do block space agreements. Essentially, you sell the capacity up front for a year or more on a given route, given time of day, given capacity, and so on.
Gotcha. Okay. So I'm guessing a lot of the people from the industry were watching your first flight very closely. What were some of the reactions by people from, not inside the company, but from the industry?
The reactions were overwhelmingly super positive, and we're quite pleased with that because, again, when we were starting, you could draw a Venn diagram of talent in aerospace, customers, suppliers, and investors for what we were going to do, and Bulgaria would hardly touch any of these circles. Uh, and so we had to, all these years, throughout very hard work, we were able to gain the credibility, and as also it's very pleasing that the reactions were so positive because they recognize all those years of hard work of our team, which is now maybe 150 plus people.
Wow, that's impressive. And how would you summarize very shortly the Black Swan? Like, what is it? What is so unique about it?
Yeah, so we needed an aircraft that will be able to fly long distances in the cheapest possible way. And so we ended up with an airplane shaped device, essentially a fixed wing aircraft. Um, it, its wingspan is 16 meters, fuselage is 8 meters. It can carry 350 kilograms and up to 3.5 cubic meters of capacity. So again, what you can fit inside of a Renault Kangoo or Volkswagen Caddy, some of those most common last mile vehicles. And yeah, it's made out of carbon fiber. It has multiple connections through which it can be controlled. But ultimately, it's supposed to fly in a predetermined route, right? It's a cargo scenario. It's very simple. The packages need to get to the destination, so that makes it very easy to be a deterministic flight. So deterministic means you get to easily program it in advance. There's always humans in the loop. We have a team of pilots at each airfield that we land in. But the good thing is also because it's a much smaller aircraft, is the size of a two-seater aircraft, it can land at very short runways that can even be unpaved. So the future is, we'll mass produce and operate these even in, like a village in a very remote area. We can service that and we can fly there, so we can connect it to the world.
Very cool. And what do you foresee? What type of cargo do you foresee Black Swan carrying the most? Is it sort of medical supplies? Is it material? Is it for, I don't know, industrial purposes?
There's a number of verticals that we can be very helpful for, starting from spare parts for industry. Let's say your production line, excuse me. Let's say your production line breaks down, and the penalties on your contract can be 6 or even 7 digits. So every hour counts. Um, that's a very low hanging fruit. Then medical supplies, will be doing a trial for the UK NHS in Scotland sometime next year, where we'll be demonstrating, shipping medical supplies between islands, and and then there's also the less obvious ones. It turns out because we spend so much time on developing a very efficient and optimized airframe, we're actually able to bring down the costs of air freight significantly, which means we can be relevant for a lot more than just the high value goods. We can also be, we can help a retailer optimize their supply chain by being able to offer same day service over a very long area. Essentially, we can service all of Europe within 6 hours or less from only 3 locations, something that nobody else can do, and that can go even for like low value goods.
No, super cool. So the Black Swan, how does it work? Do you like iterate on the model, or do you mean to mass produce the version that you have now, or is every version that you built essentially an improvement on the previous one? How does it work?
So we plan to do both iterations on the design, as well as starting production of the design that we currently have. Um, we know that this may mean multiple times to build new type of tooling and so on, but largely the concept will be the same. And ultimately, because we're the only user of that aircraft, it makes sense. We're not selling the aircraft to third parties or to other operators, so it's up to us how and when to manage, the retirement of each unit in the fleet.
Yeah, makes sense. I know from previous conversations that you and I have had that sustainability is very important to the company, both in the way that you build the drone, but also the whole process of actually, designing it. Can you elaborate a little bit on that, on why it's so important to you?
Yeah, so it's important. Sustainability is super important because it's also a matter of resource constraint. If you're trying to solve a challenge of getting goods in and out of very remote areas, it stands to reason that their supply of energy or other types of things will be similarly very limited. So you need to create a very versatile airframe. So, for example, if you want to land in Africa and you want to use electric vehicles, you're going to face a bit of a challenge because in a lot of places, the electric grid is very unreliable or it doesn't exist. So what you end up doing is putting fossil fuel into a generator to charge your batteries. So the sustainability effect is again zero. So we decided to actually start with an engine that uses gasoline because it's certified, and we can start now, and we can start delivering to customers now. We generate, a reduction of CO2 emissions by virtue of our airframe because again we were optimizing for very fuel efficient flights. So we can, even with gasoline, we can save up to 60% of CO2 emissions if a customer was going to use us versus the status quo. But we also have partnerships with a number of companies, for example, Zero Petroleum, who are building capacity of synthetic petroleum, so fully synthetically produced gasoline, as well as with Cranfield Aerospace, who are building hydrogen fuel cells for aviation. So same airframe with either minimum or no modifications, can use multiple types of fuel, and that's uh, going to be quite important for the future.
No, yeah, I guess so. Super interesting. You have to build this prototype or the first drone for a long time. It's very difficult to do without funding, of course, without external funding. You've already mentioned you went through the 11 accelerator. What other funding did you pick up along the way, and are you happy with the investors that you've managed to attract?
Oh, we are super happy. We So as we were building out credibility, our investors essentially to date include a mix of early stage funds like 11 and Founders Factory in the UK, Speed Invest out of Austria. But we also have literally hundreds of angel investors who joined us throughout the years. We started funding ourselves on Safe Notes back in 2018, and we literally ended up raising tens of millions on Safe Notes to date. And then our latest investor is SDF, Strategic Development Fund, out of the UAE. It's a sovereign wealth fund focusing on frontier technology like ours. And we were also a beneficiary of the EIC. So both the grant part, 2.5 million, as well as the equity component. So the EIC will participate in our upcoming Series A. We even had to do some equity crowdfunding on a platform called SeedBlink out of Romania. They're pan-European now, and even listed a safe note on the Bulgarian stock exchange using a new EU rule that allows for that. So really anyone with a brokerage account could buy a piece of that safe note and become an investor. I think over there we have 1,400 investors, makes us one of the largest trading stocks in the Bulgarian stock exchange.
Yeah, fantastic. I didn't even know that was possible, actually. So it's the first time I've heard that. Fantastic. What is the plan for the future? You mentioned you're
Yeah.
doing a pilot in Greece. You've got sort of for 40 million in pre-Series A funding in the bank, 150 people. What's the next 2-3 years going to look like?
So we start operations in Greece at the end of the year, beginning of next, and we'll start with a couple of drones over a single route, and then we'll keep adding drones and adding routes. So within 3 years, we plan to have hit profitability with around 100 drones, and then we'll be able to expand further after that. We're focusing on entering a number of other markets, the UAE, for example, as well as Australia and the UK. So yeah, we're quite focused on essentially commercialization being the next phase.
Fantastic. Then, final question: what keeps you up at night as CEO of the company?
Uh, Thankfully, not that many things since the first flight. Um, it's just the first flight was a tremendous achievement, but it's in the grand scheme of things, it's going to be essentially step one, day one. So making sure that the whole team remains that day one kind of mentality, and as we grow the right way in the right places. That's essentially my number one focus.
Fantastic. Well, Svilen, it was a pleasure to have you on the Tech.eu podcast. Thank you so much for sharing some insights on the journey of Dronamics, and hopefully a good continuation of the journey. Thank you so much.
Thank you. It was great to be here.